Hello and welcome. My name is Tony Gorshik. I work as a research scientist and professor at BTH in the Software Engineering Research Lab. Today we're going to talk about AI, applications, potentials, challenges for the future. To help me with this, I've invited a great guest, Professor Niklas Lavesson, who actually has almost 20 years experience in this field. And together we hope to demystify and figure out what's going on. And I think this could be interesting. Hope you join. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Welcome to the first podcast of the SOL Group, Software Engineering Research Lab in Sweden, at BTH. Today, I'm here with a professor in applied AI and machine learning. And we are going to talk about what does it mean with AI, what does it mean with applying it in reality, and how does it work. So, Niklas, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So you are a professor in applied AI?
Exactly, a professor of software engineering, but with a specialization in applied AI and machine learning.
Cool. So you work with both theory in AI and also practical stuff with AI, right?
Exactly, and I have a master in software engineering and a PhD in computer science where I focused on machine learning. So I have experience from both sides, but I have mainly been working in applied AI the last 2 decades.
Cool. Well, then you're a perfect person, right? So my biggest problem is I talk too much and I listen too little, so I'm going to apply the principle of 2 ears and 1 mouth today, which is hard for me, so please excuse me. But can you tell me a little about how you came here? So what's your road through life, right? So what's your credentials? What have you studied? What have you been working with? And why are you here as a researcher?
Sure, and I began very early with computers, as many of us did. I started programming when I was 8 or 9, and I kind of knew that I wanted to pursue some education and career that had to do with computers. So I found myself at BTH in 1998, and I started at Ronneby campus, which is no longer existing. And I started studying a Bachelor of Software Engineering. I went into the Master of Software Engineering. But at some point, I became interested in AI. And then I studied a PhD also at the BTH. And then I have mainly been working in academia, but always collaborating with the industry and society.
That's kind of cool. Living in both worlds, I mean.
Exactly. And I think that the current environment, as you mentioned, SERL, is fertile grounds for these kind of collaborations where you have one foot in academia and one foot in industry. And that is why I really like it here.
Cool. Well, full disclosure, we're colleagues, right?
Correct.
So I'm experimenting with the first podcast of the SERL on a guinea pig that doesn't have any choice. So I hope it turns out well. But let's jump into the subject. I mean, the subject is AI, right?
Correct.
And I kind of cringe all the time when I say the word AI, because for me, it's artificial intelligence, right? Now, then we renamed it to, I think, general artificial intelligence, which is kind of when AI takes over, right? But in reality, people are using it really differently. Can you kind of explain the difference between machine learning maybe and AI and general AI, and what's the difference really?
Yes, so I think in order to explain that, a short review of history is in its place.
Mm-hmm.
And artificial intelligence, AI for short, has been studied in academia for a very long time. I think we are approaching 100 years of scientific research. Yes. Huh. And it started in the 1930s So we are approaching actually 100 years. And I guess that the main interest from the beginning was to understand human intelligence. So the mathematical or theoretical models that people back then tried to develop was not really, they didn't have a purpose on their own to be intelligent systems, rather models of human or animal intelligence. But people figured out rather quickly that it was too complex to model, at least at that time. Mm-hmm. So that kind of original purpose got lost for a long while. And instead, people figured out that maybe we can build computer systems, machines that are intelligent, inspired by biology, inspired by human and animal intelligence.
So kind of like when Leonardo da Vinci created the first flying plane or machine, it flapped its wings, right?
Yes.
But then we figured out we can mimic the principle, but maybe not everything with nature, because it doesn't work mechanically, really.
Exactly, and we can actually return to that very concept from Leonardo da Vinci later on when we discuss AI. But okay. First, let me say this. During the many decades of research in AI that occurred after those initial trials, people started dreaming about what AI could do in the future. And it was basically science fiction ideas, a lot of it. And industry and society caught on, and funding increased a lot in the beginning. But when researchers could not really reach these ambitious goals, research funding plummeted. Uh-huh. And these are the periods that are known as the AI winters. And I think during the 60s and 70s is the time when we actually see that people are kind of ditching the idea of, you mentioned it, general AI, mm-hmm. the AI systems that would rival human intelligence and be versatile just like we are. And instead, people started focusing on so-called narrow AI. So AI systems that are very specifically purposed for solving a task. And then success started to happen, actually successes all over.
When you say narrow AI, right?
Yes.
You mean like face recognition or I don't know, something very specific and narrow, which doesn't really mirror humans that are versatile, but something where machines are super good at something, over humanly good at a very specific thing. Okay.
Exactly. And if you look at AI, because you related to machine learning earlier, mm-hmm. What has happened during the evolution of AI as an area is that a number of specialized areas evolved. Natural language processing, which has to do with the processing and the generation of natural languages.
So like normal English?
Normal English. I would also say that some programming languages are more natural language based than others. They are more structured, of course, in general, but there is a spectrum.
Okay.
And then we have computer vision, which deals with, of course, the face recognition, as you talked about, okay. And other applications. We have recommender systems, which would be an area where basically you have a computer system that you can interact with and provide different information about something, and you can get recommendations about which decision to take and so on. So all of these different sub-areas exist, and in each one you have very specific tasks that you try to address. And what all of them have in common is that to really reach successful goals with real-world application, you have to learn patterns from data, and this is where machine learning comes in.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So would you say that, well, if you look at the last, I don't know, year maybe, it's really recent, right? And really, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of hypes over the years, right? Something is very hot and like agile development, and then agile is everything, and agile will solve all our problems, right? But often it turns out that the problems you had before agile, kind of you have after agile, right? You rename them and restructure them, but some things are solved, some aren't. But I've never seen the hype or the level of hype with AI, right? Since OpenAI released their ChatGPT. And good or bad, I don't really care about that. But are we there yet? Are we at the precipice of because I think that's what most people want to know, right? Are we there yet? Are we going to get? Is robots going to take over in 2 years?
No, I don't think so. But I would like to make a comparison between the AI evolution and development that we see now and the advent of internet for the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are both sadly old enough to remember
yes.
when internet was introduced to the masses. Of course, we are both residents of Sweden, and we were not really the first to adopt internet. But I remember in the mid-90s, when the first computer was introduced in the school library, and it had a web crawler, a search engine.
Yep.
And of course, people were very interested in what this new technology could do. Everyone was there and trying to search for something, but you couldn't find that much because the internet was not populated with very much information yet, at least not public domain sites. And if you shift time into the future and right now, it's hard to imagine life without internet.
Mm-hmm.
You are using internet seamlessly. It's pervasive across everything you do. You're always connected through your iPad or your Android or your iPhone, your computer. Even if I go to a restaurant today and order food, it is kind of connected, right? So I pay with my phone and my order comes to my table.
Mm.
And so from the 90s and until now, it's about 30 years. And I think that it was very few in the general population back then in the 90s that could have predicted the pervasiveness of internet as we know it today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are at the stage in mainstream AI adoption now that internet was in the 90s.
Okay. Well, I think that's a nice analogy, right? But then you're also saying that most likely in 30 years, for example, or maybe sooner, the public domain AI is going to be something everybody uses without thinking about it.
Correct.
And it's kind of hard to predict exactly what that means, of course, but more or less you're not gonna drive the car manually. There's no point to that, but rather the car is going to drive, and then you can drive if you want to, right? Just as I can read a book, or I can download a book, an audiobook, right? Maybe, if I do my job, right? If I'm a plumber or if I am a programmer, AI is going to be a part of my everyday work effort.
Yes, I think that is one of the most profound and important predictions one can make, is that we don't know exactly how AI is going to look and work in 30 years. But we know that everyone will be using it seamlessly and it will be completely pervasive. It will be everywhere. Because if we look at the technology development in general, I mean, you really come from software and software engineering. You have been working with software companies and the software industry for almost, I would say your whole adult life, right?
Yeah, I'm getting old. It's kind of sad,
No,
but
but
I hear what you're saying. Yes, yes. I mean, for the last 25 years, I've been very involved with software-intensive product and service development, and the company is working with that. Absolutely.
correct. And you see that when you were a young kid,
Mm.
you first didn't have a computer.
No.
And then at some point, you got it.
I got this is important. This is actually more important than AI. I got an Atari 1040 STE. It was my first computer, and I worked all summer to buy one.
And I am from the Commodore Amiga crowds. So we were bitter enemies without knowing it.
Yes. But then I got an Amiga too, 1200. You remember the 1200?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, but those days were kind of cool because it was special. You remember?
It was very special, yes.
And do you think AI is going to be, when you think about the Amiga 500, right?
Yes.
And when I think about the Atari, and I remember this, I kind of went home and it was exotic, and you turn it on and nothing happened, and you had to figure out how it happens, right?
Yes.
And you kind of had to put in a lot of effort to make it happen, and I think that made it special. Do you think AI is going to go the same road? Do you think there is kids out there today that have the same special feeling for applied AI and AI tools as we had when we started with computers?
I am sure that there is a strong analogy to be made here, because when you got that first Atari, I'm sure you felt like I did when I got my first computer. Excitement, wonder about this piece of machine, maybe a sense of question, what could I use this for? What could be done with it? Yeah. You would also have parents and relatives and friends that have no clue about what you did when you went into your room and you sat by this computer.
Oh, yes.
They couldn't understand it at all.
No. I remember my dad was like, what the hell? I mean, I was an outdoors kid, right? And basically in the morning you go outside and then you come in when dinner's, right? And you come in dirty. You leave clean and you come in dirty. That's basically reality.
Yes.
And all of a sudden I didn't leave. And they were kind of worried about it.
Yes.
And I was sitting there like, what, right? And they were like, what the hell is he doing? And even if I was doing not, of course I played games and stuff, but even if I was doing serious stuff, they had a very hard time understanding, you're never going to use this. This is a waste of your life, right?
Yes.
So I think it's a really interesting analogy to compare.
Yeah, I think few parents predicted that their kids would have a career in computers, even though some maybe have the foresight to do it.
Yes.
And I think if I look at, I mean, we both have quite young kids, you and I, children. And if I look at them when they interact with a computer now, they are already interacting with AI. They are interacting with face recognition. They are doing various things with natural language processing. For instance, when my oldest son is writing an SMS, he can type, but he finds it much quicker to record his own voice, and that speech is processed, and natural language processing is used to generate the text from his voice, and then he can send this. So they are already interacting 6 or 8 year olds with AI systems, and they can realize the power in this. Yeah. And so I really believe that we are now in exciting times, especially the last year, which, you know, has seen the introduction of ChatGPT. Large language models have become mainstream. Generative AI, which is an umbrella term for any AI system that can generate anything, text, speech, images, and so on, has really been groundbreaking, more so in society than in academia. And that is something we can talk about as well.
Yeah. So I think we're a little jaded researchers, because first of all, we've probably been involved with AI for a longer time than the general public. And we've had fairly strong AI stuff, right? I mean, Wolfram, for example, and other systems that have supplied research with data and research with capacity.
Correct.
But I would say it's I don't like the word OpenAI. I know Musk invented OpenAI. He was the first sponsor, and the idea was that it should be open source, right? But then, of course, it was bought and paid for by others, and now it's literally a misnomer because it's not OpenAI. It's a for maximum profit company, really. But one big thing is when the internet was born, basically, yes, it's from a research project in defense industry originally, but it was kind of what made it great initially, at least, was it was an open thing, right? Everybody can post anything. It was really big and open, right? And you kind of found your audience, and it was a democratization of technology, really. But I don't feel the same with OpenAI. I've been playing around with it like everybody else, and the public parts, right? And no, if you want it properly, you have to pay, right? You have to pay for a bunch of services. The free services are quite bad, in my view. If you want to do it properly, and you don't have the technical savvy, right, that you can do it properly even free, then you literally need to buy the professional licenses for image creation, buy the professional licenses for ChatGPT, etc. And that kind of puts a completely different level of the monetization is much faster this time than it was on the internet. The internet was basically, oh, look, internet. Wow, it's exploding. How do we make money from it? Now it's like, we know how to make money from it. If you want to play, you have to pay. Do you think that's a bad or a good thing?
First of all, I think that you're spot on again, this analogy to internet development. And we will return to that quite many times. And I hope the audience does not
get bored with
it, yes. Yeah. But if I take it back first, even one more step, before the introduction of internet, during the 1980s and early 1990s, it was very popular in many countries to dial up to BBSs, bulletin board systems. Yeah. So most of my friends, including me, we had very simple modems at home, and we used a regular phone line to call up to these bulletin board systems.
Just for the younger audience.
Yes.
Well, absolutely no clue what you're talking about, right? Literally, bulletin board services, bullet board services was literally a place on the internet where you can post text information, more or less, in the beginning, where you can share ideas, basically like a asynchronous chat, if you will.
Yes. Yes, exactly. But the important notice here is that during that development, many of my friends ran BBSs from their home. So it was fully private. And of course, that there were some people that did criminal activities, and they would probably get some eavesdropping on their phone line. But otherwise, things were personal and private and decentralized. Then internet came. And of course, in the beginning, yes, you put up your websites and you're interacting in different ways. But soon you're starting to use ICQ and various early social media services. And then the big giants, tech giants, kind of took over all of the social media platforms. And we don't need to go into all of that history, but we can take a look at the current situation today. There are very few free platforms where people can interact without the kind of influence of big tech companies that also influence the legal systems, and they have a huge influence in society and so on. And you're absolutely right that the AI systems were long something that people could play with privately on their own computers at their homes. In academia, of course, researchers were largely left alone studying this area because industry or society were not very interested because they could not see how you can monetize from this.
Yeah.
they could not see how you could influence people with this.
Yeah.
But now I think, and I would come back to it, the last year, I think, has made it clear to the general public that these AI platforms, such as ChatGPT, they can be very powerful. They can generate content for you. They can increase your influence, and they can even generate revenue and business for you. And then, of course, it becomes a democratization issue again. Should a few tech companies not just own these services? You were alluding to licenses and fees and so on.
Yeah.
But should they also own our data and our queries?
And yeah, I think that's something that I think is unfair. So I'm not, very important, I'm not for any socialization of this, because I think that hampers the development, right? But there's also a trade-off. So if we think about it like this, a big language model, right? So a large language model, LLMs,
Yes.
right? Which is, just so I understand it, is the basis for example, OpenAI and ChatGPT.
Correct.
And basically what it is you train it on a huge amount of data, and the more data you have and train it on, the smarter it becomes.
You could say so, yes.
Yeah. The problem is they didn't actually ask for permission. They literally took all the data that's available publicly, or more or less, and basically trained, right? So they use my data, they used your data, everybody's data. And what irritates me is not that they're making money from it, that's fine, it's their invention, right? And they kind of made it good. Is that they kind of, it's like using my forests to build houses, and they steal my wood, right? And then they charge me for living in the house. Now, it's fine if you buy the wood from my forest, right? You build a house and then sell it to me. That's completely fine.
Yes.
And this needs to be sorted out, because now you have, what, 3 actors? You have Google, Microsoft, right? And maybe Tesla?
I would say there are a few.
Yeah.
Apple is in that mix
Apple,
as well.
Yeah, but those kind of use data. Yes, of course, you sign off everything, including your liver, when you enter Gmail. You kind of say, yes, you can take my liver, right? Because you have no clue. It's like 20 pages of, yeah, we can do what we want, and nobody reads it, right? But in reality, you kind of don't really, they kind of use your data for free to create something you have to pay for. And I think that's unfair. I mean, if they want to create something they want to sell, they should pay for the training material or the data. And I think that's a big problem with the democratization part, is you need to choose. Either you're for profit, then you need to pay for your materials, or you're open and it's free for everybody, right? And then you can argue that it's fine to use all the publicly available data. But I think it becomes, we're getting to Google takes over the internet faster this time than last time, right?
Yes, and I think that is why it's very welcome that the European Union and also American legislators are looking into AI as a specific area to maybe study, to understand how to revise and update laws and regulations. We see that both in academia and in society, we have opened up for a lot of discussions about AI ethics. We have, of course, the GDPR regulations regulating where your personal information can be stored and whether you should have access to it, and whether you can tell also companies and organizations to delete your data when you don't want it anymore. But at the same time, many of these AI techniques and technologies, they are so new and people know so little about them outside of the big tech companies. It is hard to fully comprehend how much data is gathered, how this data and when this data is gathered, and what actually happens to it.
Yeah.
And let me give you one example of things that make it complicated. Let's say that data is collected from a huge number of people namely the photos or the video of their faces, in order to train a face recognition software.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even if all of those images and videos are deleted, of course, parts of all of these images and videos have made it into a model.
Yeah.
And the idea of the AI model, if I may call it so, a little bit sloppily, just for this popular science talk, this AI model is supposed to classify faces and maybe say, oh yes, this is Tony, so we will let him into his phone without him typing the password.
Mm-hmm.
That means that there has to be some distinguishing patterns that can recognize you. And so indirectly, that part of your data is not deleted, it is retained. And it becomes increasingly complex and increasingly difficult to know where we should draw the line of which data can be stored and retained by companies or organizations for that matter.
And I think there's so laws and regulations are a different chapter. I think we need a separate podcast for that, or a separate discussion, because I have a problem with laws and regulations that they are intended to do good, but many times they actually end up doing bad. Which means I'm not sure we can regulate only ourselves out of challenges. I think there needs to be good reward systems for good behavior, and I don't think that comes from regulation or centralized control. We've had examples of that's really bad, right? So we want a distributed system, and I think we can do that. But if we just take a step back, right, because we're kind of getting into the weeds of stuff, it's kind of hard, but take a step back and look at AI as a general thing, right? So now we have large language models, which is basically a big AI model of some sort that sucks in huge amounts of data. And then, of course, it does some magic with that data, right? And then the next picture frame, I'm sitting in front of ChatGPT and asking, can you please create me an itinerary because I'm traveling to Budapest, right? Which is a great city. I was there this summer. Really nice beer, by the way.
I have yet to go there.
Oh, it's Eastern Europe. Wow. Just a parenthesis, but never mind. I did this, right, with OpenAI. This is my first practical application, actually.
Okay.
I kind of asked it to do an itinerary, right, for each city I was traveling to, and link to maps for getting there with a car and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And also which restaurants, stuff like that. But there's a big, what happened between, you have some magical, I don't know, math algorithm, right? And you have huge amounts of data, which is sucked in from everything from Facebook to everything, right? And then you have me sitting in front of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and asking them to create the itinerary. What happened between there? Can you explain that in a reasonable way? Because it's magic, right?
Well, I think, the first part you have already mentioned, that an application like ChatGPT needs to have access to large corpora, as we call them, large databases of texts. And in order to help you with the itinerary for your East European trip, it has to have some specialized knowledge about those cities and locations that you're visiting, probably from a tourist point of view. And why am I saying this? Well, large language models that form the basis of tools like ChatGPT, they usually are trained on a variety of texts within the different areas that ChatGPT or OpenAI wants people to use.
So what you're basically what you're basically saying is that the algorithm, right? It sucks in information from tourist guides for Budapest,
for instance,
and travel accounts. This was good experience. This was bad experience. Anything that is in any way associated with Budapest, in this example,
yes,
is sucked in, right? Great. then how does it tell me go to restaurant X? Is that based on the AI, sloppily, sorry, using knowledge that this is a good restaurant? Or is it some other method to figure out what to tell me? How does it practically, mechanically work? Is it that there's an AI guy sitting there and saying, yes, most people like food? or how does it work?
I think the very simple answer, that is not the complete answer, is that it is connected to associations, in the sense that things that co-occur. Let's assume that internet is the repository of all the information that is...
Let's say all the knowledge is in the internet.
In the public internet, yes, right? Yes. So that's where they have taken all of the data. And of course that on this vast universe of information, there will be a lot of mentioning of the city Budapest. And the city will be mentioned in, as you say, in travel guides, in assessments from regular people that have been traveling and so on Wikipedia pages. You can imagine where this name occurs. And so when you are typing in a question in ChatGPT, of course that question has to be parsed first to understand what does he actually want.
So that's basically the prompt, right?
That's the prompt, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's not enough that you randomly drop the word Budapest or itinerary. So it has to be something more, right? So the more context you provide, the more kind of a story can be generated.
From my question.
From your question, your user query or prompt. And then there is an engine that looks for associations to Budapest that correspond to your query.
So basically the engine is the algorithm, if you will.
Yes, to make it very simple, let's just call it one algorithm. Of course, it is a system of many different subsystems.
Yeah. But it's basically the big computer running in a lab somewhere that has all the intelligence and all the data in the background.
Yes.
But when you say it's trained, you know, when you say it's trained on, does that mean that the big computer, the algorithm, right, the big thing, the big monolith, is it trained on all the data for every possible scenario and every possible situation first, and then it can answer my queries? Or does it look for the data when I ask?
That's a complicated question to respond to, because we see rapid development in this area. But if we look at the old versions of these systems, they were so-called pre-trained. So they are trained on a large corpora of texts, and then they are launched as a product. So you can then ask your queries, and there is also a sophisticated system, of course, that parses your query, understands your query, and translates this to some way to look for associations that are connected to your query. But whatever you write doesn't really affect the pre-trained model. It will be the same until the engineers revise it.
Create a new one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now, the latest version, at least of ChatGPT, we should say to the audience that this is just one product. There are many products out there.
We're not trying to promote ChatGPT in any way. It's just, I think it's the most common thing people know about.
It's on everybody's lips today.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about basically in this specific scenario, mostly LLMs, so large language models.
Correct.
Of which OpenAI has one, or a couple, but it's a company. And they are supplying a service, an interface to this LLM, which is called ChatGPT. But there are open source versions. There is other companies doing their own thing. So we're not promoting anything. It's very important. We're just using the terminology to kind of make it simple. Yeah. Sorry, but yeah, you're right. We should say that.
Yes, but the latest version of this system has the ability to parse your query to use the large corpora it has been pre-learned on, but then also to do web searches to complement the information. So if the pre-built model was built 2 years ago, and you are searching for something that is very recently happening, then it has the ability to look into new sources of data as well and combine that with the stored or pre-trained knowledge. So that is obviously a huge increase in quality in many answers that has to do with information that is recent. So that is why it's a little bit complicated question. But another part that I would like to mention that is important here, there is another ingredient to ChatGPT that makes it exciting for many people to use. It has been trained not just to respond to your query or prompt. Actually, the main functionality is not that. The main functionality is that it has conversational capabilities, meaning that you don't just ask it a question, you actually discuss and reason with it in order to arrive at an answer later.
Yeah.
And people are amazed by this, and it is groundbreaking as an engineering feat to get this working so well, to scale across the world and the many users of this system. But if we look from an academic standpoint, I would say that most AI or machine learning or natural language processing researchers are not surprised by the development. We can all be surprised by the engineering feat that this came out as a product.
Yeah.
But if we look at the academic development of all of these sub areas that we have been talking about, machine learning, natural language processing, and so on, we could see the landmarks or the milestones, if you will, that have been leading up to this development. And even in the 1960s, people developed conversational AI agents. And the first one was called ELIZA, at least the first one that was popularized.
Yeah.
And ELIZA was a psychotherapist. So you could basically ask it questions about, and it could also ask you questions.
Yeah, okay.
So you could say, Tony, how are you feeling today?
Okay.
And you would say, I feel depressed. And it would ask, how long have you been feeling depressed? For 2 months. Is this the first time you have been feeling depressed? And so on.
But isn't there a big difference between ELIZA, for example,
Yes.
and how that was actually engineered? A little in the weeds, right? But that was more, that wasn't really the same generative quality, but rather you kind of had to tell it that if you get this type of prompt, you should answer this type of way. And that was done by the engineers more. Now it's more, the engineers actually don't do any of that interaction programming, but rather the model itself figures out statistically what it should answer. And isn't that the big, huge difference really from ChatGPT today conversationally and ELIZA conversationally? You kind of had to, remember the old games we had when we started gaming? When we started gaming, it wasn't gaming as people see it now.
No.
My first was Leisure Suit Larry. You remember?
Yes.
Where it's literally a PC with text, and I had to kind of figure out, ask questions or say, I jump. But if I didn't say I jump properly, it didn't recognize the command. So I had to guess what the programmer wanted me to say to progress in the game. But now, with ChatGPT, it's more adaptive, right?
Correct, but everything is relative. And if you think about that time when you played Leisure Suit Larry the first time, I can ask you a question. Weren't you amazed and excited about this?
Yes.
Didn't you think it was very very cool that you could actually type in something and Larry would execute the action you wanted, right?
Yes.
You did not think about the restrictions and limits that much, I assume.
Well, actually, I did, but that's beside the point. I get it. So what you're saying is basically that it's not that far removed. it's just better at accepting different inputs and getting a good result.
Yes, and I would qualify it even more by saying this. We can make a distinction between systems that are in fact functioning intelligently in some way.
Mm-hmm.
They are intelligent in their actions. And systems that appear intelligent.
Yes.
We have all met people that have demonstrated that they are clearly intelligent or high performing in something. And we have also met people that seemingly appear intelligent and high performing, but when you scratch the surface, they are not.
Yeah.
And I would say that if we go back to the days of Eliza or Lesser Suit Larry, at that point in time, if you look at the technology level and also the technology awareness of the general population, those systems, Eliza for instance, appeared intelligent. It appeared like you could have an intelligent conversation with it. Underneath the hood, you are completely right. Most of the sentences were hard-coded, and maybe there was a randomness to certain questions so that it would appear that you're speaking to a human.
Yeah.
But of course, again, if you scratch the surface, you would see that the system is not intelligent, but it appeared kind of intelligent.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at ChatGPT and the similar technology, yes, it is much more powerful. It is much more capable under the hood, but it actually has a lot of engineered manual glue functionality that make it appear even more intelligent than it is.
Okay, so basically you're saying that it wasn't intelligent before, but it appeared. Now it's slightly intelligent, but appears much more so.
Yes, and I mean, now I'm not a cognitive scientist, neither are you.
Nope.
So I don't want to get into what is actual intelligence and what is not.
No.
We are talking about it in the kind of general mainstream understanding of intelligence, the way we would judge people.
Absolutely, and there's a lot to say there. But if we don't get into the weeds, but if we kind of take a step back, okay, what does this mean? Okay, now we have OpenAI, right? And we have a bunch of others. I've been playing around with image creation, creating a logo for something, and taking a picture of mine, and can you make me blue? That kind of thing, right? It's just fun. And I'm both really disappointed and both really impressed at the same time. It depends, right? But okay, let's assume I'm a lawyer. I'm taking the thing that's so far removed from what I am, I can hardly imagine it. So not to just be an engineer nerd, right? And my job is basically three things, I guess, right? Interpret the law and regulations, and kind of help my clients figure out how they should navigate the jungle of regulations and laws.
By applying the law, yes.
Yeah,
correct.
Right. But laws are written in a way they should be interpreted, which is good and bad, I think. I think if engineers made laws binary, it would be interesting, but fairly destructive. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's much better now either. So that's beside the point. But I'm a lawyer, and the reason why I take lawyers is I'm starting a company currently. I do that for once in a while, and I want terms of service, right? Before I had to pay a law firm, I don't know, 100K to do this for me. I actually went to ChatGPT and asked them to kind of look at terms of service of 20 companies and said, generate one for me. And then I kind of prompted it, as you say, right? And they refined it and prompted it, refined it, prompted it. And actually created a great terms of service for me. 20 pages, legalese, right? Looks really good, right? Here's my question. I can take that terms of service then, of course, right? Let's not get into the legal aspect of me taking stuff from ChatGPT. Ignore that, right? But in theory, I could take that thing and use it. So right. I really don't need a lawyer for that, which means I kind of fix the problem. The issue I have is this, and I call it the catch-22 for a stupid person. If I need OpenAI and ChatGPT or anything like that, or in 5 years, a better version of that, if I need it to help me in my work, right? I really need it.
Yes.
To program, to create terms of service, to create a recipe. It doesn't matter what it is, but the harder the need is, the more important the result is. But if I really need it, I can't validate the result. I can't read it and say, yeah, this looks good and correct, because then I, per definition, don't need it. So if I can validate the result that comes out of ChatGPT, per definition, I could have written it myself. Now, ChatGPT might do it a little faster than me, but in essence, I can read it. But then I don't need it. But if I really need it, I can't validate it. This is what scares me personally. You don't know if it lies to you, and you accept it as truth. How do we solve that problem? Think about journalists asking ChatGPT for the truth, and they get the angled thing, or lawyers, or I'm coding, right, and I get errors. If it becomes a co-pilot, I know that's probably trademarks now by somebody, but if it becomes your wingman or wing girl, right, to help you out, how do you know it's not lying to you? How do you know it's not drifting you from the mark?
I think that this is perhaps the most important question that we should ask ourselves when we are using these tools. How do we validate the response? And I mean, you could draw an analogy to when you go to a human expert. Instead of you being a lawyer, let's say that you need a lawyer to come up with some legal document, an agreement or some sort. And you have to go to this lawyer, who is obviously an authority in the area. You get the documents, and when you get them back, you cannot really do more than say, okay, right? You cannot really validate that this is correct, because then you wouldn't need that lawyer to begin with.
Exactly.
Yes. And we are doing those kind of, we are buying those kind of services every day.
Yeah.
And most of us who are employed at some place have co-workers. We have to trust our co-workers' competences every day, because otherwise we would have to do all the work ourselves, no matter where we are.
Yeah.
And so I don't think ChatGPT is different. It doesn't matter for me who is the generator of a response or advice or something you need, some product or service. It all comes down to how do we validate it.
Yeah.
And so here is the important point of this. If you're thinking that you will get huge productivity gains from ChatGPT, you could be right, but you could also fall into the situation that you just described yourself. It's generated quickly, but you have to spend a lot of resources validating. And I think that is a clear limitation of this technology. The same limitation as if you would have received the information from a human entity, right?
Yeah.
So that means that there is a restriction of what ChatGPT could do for you if you take the results seriously and you're going to actually use it.
Yeah.
And that we haven't really solved. So we don't have automatic validation. There are people working in these areas. But again, if I may take it one step further, imagine that we have an AI that can validate an AI who validates the validator.
Yeah.
You will always have this trust issue. And that's why I think it's hugely important that we, all of us, we pose demands on the developers of these AI systems, that the AI systems should be able to reasonably motivate why they give you a certain answer. They should be able to give you evidence for why they would give you a certain response. Now, it doesn't remove your need to validate, but it would clearly help you and cut the time you would need.
But I think this is a very important topic, because what I've noticed the last year is that in many of my company collaborations, right? So for everybody, what we generally do here in the Searle Lab, right, is literally we work with any company that works with software intensive product and service development, right? So think Spotify, think car manufacturer, think banks, doesn't really matter. As long as there's a software part of their business,
Yes.
we kind of work with them. And what we try to figure out is how can they develop better products and services, cheaper, faster, smarter, better for everybody. And we're kind of the engineering researchers try to figure out, well, if you organize your team like this, or if you use this tool, or if you use this tech or this algorithm, you kind of do it better and it becomes better, right? And our hard job is measuring, does it become better or not just thinking it's better, but actually measuring it. That's kind of the research part. Many of the companies that I work with are a little bit in a panic. The most usual term I hear is we're already behind.
Yes.
Right.
With regard to AI.
With regard to AI and everything that's happened, we need to get moving fast. And my immediate reaction is, no, take a deep breath because everybody's behind. That's always the case. Second is, we have no clue if it's actually a good or bad thing. I mean, I wish it is a good thing. I think it's going to be a good thing. But I actually don't know. And when I say I don't know as a researcher, I can't prove it. Not beyond a shadow of a doubt, but prove it in any structured, reasonable way that is possible to be transparent in how I prove it. And why I think that's important from the validation part. So you enter a sentence, please give me an itinerary, right? For the best restaurant in Budapest. And OpenAI spits out, the best restaurant in Budapest is X. Okay? Not Elon Musk X, another X. And then I just buy it. And I go there and I have a nice meal, right? There might be 10 times better X somewhere.
Yes.
And the validation part is figuring out, is the output X the best or at least not bad? And the more complex the question and the problem being solved, the harder it is to figure out what X is. If it's good or bad, if it's right out wrong. The first interaction I had with ChatGPT specifically was this. I said, can you please create a CV for me, Tony Gorshik, right? And I asked a couple of queries, right? And it generated a really nice CV for me. And I read it. I'm slightly forgetful, but I'm not completely. So I can read my own CV. And I read it and it looks really good. Some small stuff, but in general. But then I apparently started a biotech company. It was a name there. It was when I started it, what we did. It was really detailed. And I'm like, either I forgot something important or this is completely fabrication. It was a complete fabrication. I've never been involved in such a company. I've never heard of the company. I've never worked in the company. I don't know even if it exists at all. And here's what scared me. When I kind of, for me, when it became real, visceral, is I asked, because I was having a nice conversation with the AI, right? So I asked, where did you get the biotech company from? Because I generally wanted to know what data source it parsed. How did it figure that out, right? And it just said, oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And then it regenerated the CV without that.
Yes.
It's fine to be wrong, but it's never fine to say, oh, my bad. And then not explain why it was wrong, because then I don't know what level of trust I have for it. And that scared me, because if I was generating your CV,
yes,
I just might have posted it, and that seems trivial for a CV. But think about this. I'm generating code for a control system for a nuclear power plant, right? Or I'm reporting the news of what's actually happening in a very important situation where people need the truth.
Yes.
Right? And there is no, truth is not on a scale. It's absolute. Then we can have a failure in reporting the truth in terms of the scale. But the truth is the truth. And we need to, you can't launch a rocket on maybe or a gradual truth. Either it works or it doesn't work, right? And in those situations which are safety critical in some way or socially critical, I think it's really scary that this might become a co-pilot when it can't explain itself. You know the analogy you did with you can't trust if you go to a lawyer and get the document, you can't validate that either. No, but I know who generated it. And when the problem comes, I can go back to the lawyer, right?
Yes.
But with AI, it's just like, oh, my bad.
Yes, especially with these large language models. I told you in the beginning of the podcast that it's about statistical association, basically.
I actually don't think you did. Can you go into that?
No, I mean, we talked about this
Yeah,
connection between a user query and the corpora of text. You're trying to find basically associations that are similar out there on the internet as the associations that are and the context that is listed in your user query. And if there is a wrong assumption or association, the system wouldn't know. And that is why it confidently will give you the wrong answer. And when you point out that a piece of that answer is incorrect, it can understand it's incorrect because you just pointed it out, but it doesn't know why. It can re-examine the large corpora out in the world, and it will probably still find that association that is incorrect. And you can easily send ChatGPT or similar services off into a circular argument where it will tell you over and over again that it is very sorry and it will not make the same mistake again, and it will do exactly the same mistake again.
Yeah.
And you said that CV maybe is trivial. I actually asked ChatGPT myself to generate my a summary of my academic career, like a short CV. And I'm not a well-known researcher. So first it didn't know at all who I was. Okay, that's a fair answer, I think.
Yeah.
But when I said that, well, my name is this, and I'm affiliated with BTH. Okay, it generates confidently a summary of my biography, basically. And it said that Niklas has a PhD from Lund University from 1996. Now, my PhD is from 2008 and from BTH, but my supervisor's PhD is from 1996 from Lund. So it confidently merged us because we co-occur on the internet.
Of course.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that those types of error people should be very wary of. And yes, if you, instead of generating a short biography or a legal document that we can actually in principle validate and check with some work, if we instead generate 10,000 lines of code, that would be highly problematic.
Yeah. And it's not just problematic with code. Let's take code as an example. Right?
No, exactly.
But if you generate 100,000 lines of code or 10,000 lines of code, it's one thing that it doesn't compile. So compile, basically you generate the code and then you try it out if it works or not.
Yes.
And then if it doesn't work, you can fix the error and you find the error. That's fine. That's easy. Well, not easy, but that's not the issue. The issue is when it actually generates code, which is actually not what you intended it to generate, but it actually works.
Yes.
Just like my CV, it looked like I was a biotech engineer, blah, 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 right?
Yes.
And if I didn't catch it, that would be in my CV. It wouldn't be wrong, right? It will make sense when you read it.
Exactly.
Very confidently, by the way, because I was really high up in that organization, apparently. Never heard of it, but that scares me. That scares me because I think humans are generally lazy when it comes to boring stuff. And I think that my use of that kind of language model generation would be stuff I don't like, right?
Yes.
Or I don't want to waste my time on that. I want to do other stuff, which means I could generate huge errors, right? Which I don't catch, and then they propagate.
Correct.
And then when they propagate, another language model is trained on the wrong thing, right? And then another person takes it out.
Yes.
And has a larger error. And this is, so basically error drift, right? So you get further and further from reality, really. Isn't this a huge problem if everybody uses these kind of models for everyday thing all the time?
I think it is a huge problem, and I think it's even worse than that if we look at things from a long-term perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first questions you asked me today was, are the robots soon here? Will AI take over in 2 years?
Yeah.
I get this question a lot, and I fully understand the question and the fear behind it. But to be very honest, what I fear the most is us humans. And I think if we take the hypothetical scenario that the mainstream, the general population, young and old, school teachers, professors, lawyers, authors, will start to use these kind of generative AI tools more and more, what will happen long term is that humans will lose the ability to be critical. You will lose your innate ability, or your trained ability actually, to validate things.
Yes.
So you're not just losing your ability to create things yourself. I mean, if someone would use a generative AI tool for 20 years writing texts, they would be very bad probably at writing text on their own, if trying. But they would also kind of lose the ability to be able to validate and evaluate the text. And this is my fear now. So if people are starting to use these tools more and more, okay, so more and more material will be created. It will be, let's say, more and more the same, less creative, and soon the generative AI tools, they will not learn from just human-made text. They will learn from text that has been generated by the same systems, maybe.
Yeah, so AI basically learns from AI, learns from AI, learns from AI, and becomes more and more like that the further down the road we go.
So the information will be more and more homogeneous, right?
Yeah.
What exists. So that is one clear problem that we need to address. But I also think that if we give away too much of our human learning and ability to these systems, because as you say, we are lazy, I think we may arrive at a point, I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophet here, but we may arrive at a point where it's hard to get back to where we were.
We already are there.
We are almost at the mercy of the AI systems.
But this has already happened. So if you look at 100 years ago, right? A normal person, any person really, right? That lived, not an extreme, but a normal person, they could start a fire. Just take that simple example. They could literally start a fire.
They could start a fire. They could also navigate to a location.
Yeah, they could start the fire. They could navigate. They could figure out how to bake bread, whatever it is, right? Kind of base knowledge. Today, people think bread comes from the store. People kind of think, fire comes from magic. And no, I mean, we lose skills we don't use. That's what we're discussing, right?
Yes.
And I agree completely with that analogy. I think that's spot on. That's one scary thing. So basically, our authors, as an example, are not longer authors. They're prompters asking AI to create the authorship.
Yes.
And then new AIs are trained on that product from AIs, and then all the books became the same, or the same style, whatever you want to say.
Yes.
So that's one danger, and losing the skills, which means it's very hard to actually go back.
Correct.
But there's also a slanting danger I see. So for example, first of all, just to clarify, just because the majority thinks something doesn't mean it's true. It's often the opposite, right? So if you look at the earth is flat, that was kind of the common consensus. And if you didn't agree, you were a kook or a science denier or a religious denier, then you were burnt on the stake, right? If you said the Earth was round. So if you take an AI back then, you just transport it back in time, right? And it sucks in all the corpus, all the data when the Earth was flat. And you ask OpenAI old, then, is the Earth flat or how does the Earth look? It's going to say it's flat because it doesn't have intelligence to figure out that it's round. It just reads everything and does the association Earth flat. Is that reasonable?
I would say that it's even worse than that, because if you would have asked ancient ChatGPT, is the Earth round? It probably not. It wouldn't just have said that the Earth is flat. It would have said that we shouldn't talk about that the Earth might be round. That is not politically correct.
Yes.
And I think that this is already integrated into not just ChatGPT, but most of the mainstream social media platforms and also the so-called AI tools.
Yeah.
So when we talked a while before about that today's AI systems are adaptive to some part, but they also have some kind of manually engineered glue part. That glue part, to a large extent, is not just there for these systems to appear intelligent. They're also there to stop you from asking the wrong questions. And now the audience may think that we are conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
No, it's very easy to verify this. It is just to ask a politically incorrect question to ChatGPT. And it is very clear that the answer you would get is a manually inputted answer.
Yeah.
And I think that, as you say, the mainstream kind of consensus or what is politically correct or what is okay to talk about is not necessarily what is factually true.
Not even that. It's not that it's not it can be factually wrong, but that's easy to figure out. Well, relatively. What's scary is that it propagates, which means that a slight slant becomes a larger slant, becomes a larger slant until you're in an extreme. I don't care if it's politically or not, right, left, up, down, doesn't matter, but it becomes a really steep curve and it escalates. Normally, what scares me with this type of technology is that it's exponential, right? It's not like I think green, you think blue, right? And then we have a bunch of people thinking green and blue, and maybe we end up 50-50, right? That's kind of how the world works. And then you have two views on things, and then you might have one purple guy, right? That's Copernicus, for example, right? Or yes. Somebody who's the Earth is round. And then, of course, all of us kill him because we have the science is settled, right? So shut up, right? That's not how human knowledge evolution works.
No.
The extremists, the people who can be extremely wrong and inappropriate, call it what you will, but they can also be extremely right and appropriate, but very seldom they are a part of the majority. And what scares me with this technology is that it doesn't replace the extreme. It actually evens out everything to a center position, which in self can be slanted, right? Because if everybody thinks blue is nicer, 80% of the population thinks blue is nice.
Yes.
Then the AI will say blue is nicest, right? Even if the 20% think red is better, doesn't matter, right? So that's one problem we have, and then everything will become bluer and bluer and bluer until there is no red anymore. Another really scary thing is that purple will never be allowed, because we won't train people to think and train people to think purple, because AI thinks for us more or less. And also, if purple comes up, it's going to be killed by the blue.
Correct. And I think that there is a solution approach to this as well. Mm-hmm. We talked about an important solution approach before, regarding validation. If the AI systems could motivate very clearly and trace back to why they would give you a specific response, that would be very useful for all of us. What you're referring to now, I think we should tackle by requiring that the AI systems are transparent. Transparent and open, and that there is as little manual tampering as possible. Within the realms of the law, of course. Just as we forbid child pornography or any other unwanted thing in society, the AI systems need to be regulated so that they don't generate content that would basically amass to crime. But in the open society and in the open debate of society, the system should be transparent, so you should be able to peer into where do they get the knowledge. You shouldn't just require them to motivate why they give you a certain answer. It should be very clear that the response I receive should not be manually engineered and provided by some young tech guy in San Francisco.
Exactly. Because who died and made them God?
Yes.
Because I think the closest you come to becoming God as a concept is that the fewer people you have to kind of decide stuff, what's true, what's appropriate, what's good, what's bad, translates into being God, right? Because here you have a very few set of people kind of putting up the uniform, what's acceptable or not, and then using a hugely powerful tool, AI, to generate the support for all of humanity. And then all of humanity assumes, no, this is trained, even if it's trained on the actual data without any interference, it's still a problem because a majority is often wrong. I mean, if you look at it from a historical perspective, we didn't jump to, it's very seldom only, the big stuff is not, it's not small leaps, it's often big leaps. And those big leaps are generally asynchronous, they are generally removed from the majority view.
Yes, what you're alluding to is actually one of the flaws or problems of these systems. We are very focused now on large language models and the tools thereof, because I think that this is sort of in the consciousness of everyone now, from industry to society. But I think that the more information there is about a specific topic, and let's say that the most accounts of the topic that occurs in the wild, so to speak, are wrong. Well, then you will be provided the wrong answer. That is just the way it is, because that is statistically it is the most probable answer given just the sheer amount of information that says something. But it is maybe then in a hypothetical setting actually incorrect.
And actually in a real setting, just to kind of clarify that, what we're literally talking about is a magic box, an algorithm, sucking in all the data, everything that's written, talked about, chatted about, etc., into sucking it in. And then it basically statistically figures out what the probability is between the question and the answer, given how much data says X. So if a majority says blue, associated with something, you'll get the answer blue. But it's not, the OpenAI or AI is not intelligent from the format to be able to say, I know a majority says blue, but actually blue is wrong, red is correct. We haven't gotten there yet, right?
No, I would say we are very far from it.
Yeah, and that's general AI, right? That's real AI. When people think about machines taking over, that's what we're discussing, that when AI can actually get huge amounts of data, but actually either formulate purple or basically say red is actually correct even if blue is a majority.
Yes, I think we can reach some kind of conclusions at this point in the podcast, and one of them being that yes, the machines will probably take over soon, but it will not be because of the reason that many people thought, namely that the machines became self-aware and they started to become evil or they want to dominate humans and so on.
Yeah.
No, the machines are taking over in the sense that these tech giants, they create products that people don't want to live without, and actually people want to basically almost depend on them.
Yeah.
And the tools restrict our thinking and our language, and they may send us off into some direction, and we either don't know because we lack the ability to validate, or we don't care because we've become too complacent and lazy to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Because remember, to some extent, these models also almost compel speech, or they will eventually. So when you're asking your prompts using forbidden language, if we speak in conspiracy terms, it may just say that it doesn't understand you. You have to use the right wordings.
Yeah.
And this can be manually engineered today for those that want to speed up that development. But it will eventually not need being manually engineered, because soon information that is existing digitally will just be generated by these engines anyway.
Yeah. So even if you ask the wrong question, you get the answer that's intended.
Yes, correct. But if I'm going to turn our kind of doomsday discussions, and gloom discussions, into something that is constructive and productive and even optimistic and positive, I would say that number one, these tools are very exciting and very interesting, and you can do a lot of good with them, and you can increase productivity and quality in a lot of your endeavors. Clearly so. But I think we need to start educating ourselves about the technology so that we use it for the right reasons, so that we understand when not to use it. And when not to use it is, I mean, the typical example would be when we know it will provide a bad or incorrect answer, when we know it cannot solve a specific task.
But that's scary because that's a very hard line to draw.
Yes and no, because I think that being able to draw that line has to do with your competence about AI. And we talked about, I think you mentioned earlier that companies are kind of in a panic mode. They don't know how to kind of look at this technology. They feel that they are already behind and so on.
Yeah.
I think that companies, organizations, and even private persons should take a step back, take a deep breath, and just think about how do we increase our competence about this new technology? Much like productive companies and citizens did about the internet 30 years ago. I mean, the companies that succeeded in the 90s were the ones that became internet transformed companies. Not the companies that continued business as usual and just put up their business on our homepage. But companies that actually transformed their business models, transformed the way they deliver products. Or created
new business models given the tech. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. So they were the ones that were highly successful. We can just look at all the social media platforms, Amazon, and so on.
Yeah.
And I think we can take that same approach to AI. So if we look at an organization or a company, I would tell any company today, you need to perform AI transformation. It does not mean that you need to use AI for anything. No, it means that you should develop enough competence, high and low in the company, on the grassroots level and in the managerial levels.
Yeah.
So that you can make intelligent choices of when to use this technology and when not to use it.
Yeah.
If you use it, you should also know how to validate the results. And if we regard AI as just another general purpose way to automate things, because we humans love automating things,
Yes.
then we should know exactly which parts of our processes and our tasks we should automate and which ones we should leave to humans. And let me just elaborate a little bit on that last point. If we look at the state of humanity 150 years ago, maybe, I mean, if you would travel, you will walk or maybe take a horse, maybe take a train to some places. And when the cars came, horses became some novelty or hobby for most people.
Yes.
And then onwards, of course, then we have high-speed trains, we have airplanes and so on. And now we have many different modes of transportation that we can use. But you know whether you would walk or take the car or take the airplane or train. Maybe sometimes there's a conflict in you whether you should take the train or airplane, but roughly you would know when to take which mode.
Yep.
So when to automate and how to automate.
Yep.
Because what I just mentioned now are just means of automation, right? It's automating you going from point A to point B. The same mind or the same way of thinking we can apply to AI. So we can actually take any organization. Let's take a software development organization just for the sake of it, because we are here in CERL.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we look at a software development company, I mean, it would be fairly straightforward to look at what are the different tasks and processes that we are concerned with in this organization. High and low, and long-term and short-term and so on. Which parts of this drives costs? Which parts are maybe monotonous, very kind of basic, boring, as you alluded to before? And which parts of those could we automate using AI? Much like we automated things just by putting them in a computer before.
Yep.
You remember, instead of just forming spreadsheets with your pencil and manually calculating everything, we use Excel today, and that is an automation of a lot of calculations that we did manually before. And the same mindset could be applied to AI. So I would start thinking about strategies for developing competence. And of course, for a company, it could be collaborating with academia. Even earlier in the process, we should try to integrate this competence improvement about AI and awareness in the school system.
Yeah.
We should not leave this development to people that just want to sell products.
No.
Which is the case today. And it is actually a little bit cynically, but it is also the case of internet and iPads and all of this kind of equipment that now is in the school. But I would say there are many instances where pupils and teachers are not using this technology.
I agree. And I also think that they're overusing it because they're actually handwriting skills, for example, are going down because you're using an iPad, or the iPad, as an example, becomes actually a hindrance to learning because you see the tool as the purpose in itself, not as a tool. It's not transparent. Like pen and paper is so old and we're used to using it. We don't think about the pen and paper as a tool. It just is.
Correct.
And I think new IT technology, not new anymore, but still an iPad or internet, etc., is semi-transparent. And we haven't really figured out how to use it just yet. And I think AI is completely new. They haven't even started. But maybe in 10 years, you won't do research by yourself by searching in a search engine, but you're asking AI instead to give you the answer, right?
Correct.
What is a little scary about that is today, when you do search engine search, yes, there is of course manipulation in the search engines. They kind of tell what's the true, what's good, what's bad, which is not a good thing. But anyway, but it's even worse when you get the actual answer from one source. You don't even have the opportunity to see different links and do critical checks between 5 different sources, right? But let's go back to the one thing you said with transparency, right? Which I think is absolutely critical. So I asked ChatGPT, create a CV for me, right? We go back to that.
Yes.
And I get biotechnical company Tony created one. And I asked ChatGPT, sorry, but where do you get this from? Today the answer is, oh, sorry, I'm wrong. And then it just removes it as it didn't exist.
Yes.
So that's zero transparency, right? We can agree. But how can it be done? Because as far as I understand, and I'm not an expert in this, but as far as I understand, literally the penetration of the algorithm to the data, it's not as easy as saying, yeah, I got it from this link. No, it's the training on the incomplete corpus, which means even if it gives you a link, it's going to give you a huge tree structure that's impossible for me to figure out what the hell it is. And basically trying to figure out what the source is impossible. It kind of takes snippets of 2 trillion, billion, gazillion sources. How can it be transparent? Can we even do that, really?
I think the number one reason we cannot peer into what is happening today doesn't have to do with the technological problem. It has to do with the fact that these systems are closed.
Okay, so what you're saying
You're
is...
not allowed to peek in.
So if you had an open AI, an actual open AI, right? Which is public domain, which is open, the algorithms are completely transparent, the actual data sets are completely transparent, everything, right? Would it be possible for me to highlight something that I got as a response and say, where do you get this from? And get a sensible answer back?
It would be possible, I say now in theory, because we haven't tried, right? Because the systems are closed. But it would be possible in theory to make a connection between your prompt, the words, and the order of occurrence of the different words. So you can get the semantics of the sentence, you get the meaning of the sentence of your query, and connect that to different parts of, let's say, the model, even though, as we said before, the large language model is actually a model of models. But you would be able to get a connection to at least stored patterns and words that have fired.
Okay.
And from that, there is a lot of research now going on transparent AI, on understandable machine learning models, and so on. There is tons of work from the last 2 decades of how to extract meaning or understanding or motivations from black box models.
Okay.
So if you have a neural network, for instance, if you have enough number of neurons or nodes in such a network in order to solve a specific problem, if you just look at it and everything is open, you will see a lot of interconnected nodes, and maybe they have some different weights attributed to them. It will be very hard for you to understand that and see the reasoning behind a decision. But there are ways to harvest meaning out of such models. And without getting too technical, just to give an example of how this can be done for, let's say, a smaller model, let's say a small neural network. And what you would do is, you know that you can send in queries to the network and you can get responses out from the other side. Now imagine that you have the network, it exists and it's open. And you generate a human understandable model, let's say a tree model, where it is very clear the different parts of the tree will tell you which way to go to take a decision about, depending on, let's say you start your phrasing with what if, okay, then we go in this direction and so on. So you generate this tree model, this understandable tree model, by inputting a lot of new queries into the neural network, and then you have the right answer, supposedly, that comes out. So now you can generate an almost unlimited sized data set of queries and the correct inputs. That can be used to generate a human understandable machine learning model, like a decision tree.
Okay.
And that one you can actually visualize and read. And so I'm saying you cannot apply that directly to a large language model.
No, because it's kind of more opaque, if you will.
Yes, and it's much more complex. But you can use those kind of strategies and approaches to do research about how we can gain understanding of the reasoning that goes on.
Wouldn't that be a good idea for regulation? Instead of people, if we're completely honest, have no clue what they're actually regulating much of the time. And all regulations is kind of hard to be expert on everything, right? But especially here, I feel that regulation is a two-edged sword, right? It might hinder and limit and drive a specific agenda with regulation, or it might protect and be a good thing. And often it's both. It's a two-edged, right?
Correct.
But if you look at it like this instead, why not put the law in place, European Union, US, whatever, all answers from any LLM or equivalent have to be traceable to motivation of the source. End of discussion. Which means you're not allowed, even if it's closed, you're not allowed to spit out green as an answer unless you can show me as the actual recipient of the result why it's green.
Yes, I mean, all I can say is, and we have said it before on the podcast, you and I are not legal experts. We are not experts of ethics.
Nope.
We are not even, I would say, experts of philosophy. We are engineers and we are research scientists in areas such as computer science and software engineering. So everyone has to just understand that when we are speaking here. But if I look at this as me, the private person, but with my experience and competence in AI, I would say that the first step would be to have regulations in place that forces AI models and everything around the data to be completely open, with some exceptions. And I will qualify that. If we look at societies that are progressive in the good sense that they are meaningful places, democratic places to live in, where you can pursue whatever happiness or kind of goals you want to pursue within, of course, the realms of law. You have to have some things that are punishable and so on, some things that are criminal, that society rejects completely. But given that we can say that most things should be free to do, to express, and most information sharing should be fully free. You should not be punished for speaking your mind or holding an opinion and so on.
No.
In other words, usually democracy, progression, and kind of goodness comes from openness and freedom of information and freedom of sharing information.
And freedom of expression, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get you.
And if we apply that thinking to AI technology, the best way would be to democratize the technology in the sense that everyone should have access. If our society hinges on AI, if your career or success in a specific trait hinges on the use of AI, you and I must have equal access to AI technology.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is discrimination.
Yeah, like electricity or the internet, really.
Exactly. And these AI models should be required to be open and free for people to share information about and to peer into. Much like in Sweden, we have also freedom to take out any kind of public decision or public document and so on that, about society. if something is completely pervasive, we should be able to get it out. If we go to a specific company that has a specific product, and not everyone needs this product, but let's say I really want this product, of course there should be at the company's discretion that some things the company holds private because it has to do with competitiveness.
Yeah.
But as soon as there is one company or a few companies that provide some service that everyone needs, it usually becomes public in some way, right? And I think that AI is one such technology. Just like internet or the access to digital information about different things, people should have access to AI models and data used for AI models.
Yeah.
But that is my personal opinion, I should say.
And I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it. I mean, I don't want to be dark, but everything that's new or old is both light and dark, right? And then sometimes it's gray in the middle, right? But historically, with the internet, for example, right, I would say one of the largest democratization tools that's been achieved is Google. I'm saying Google. I know there are other search engines, but you say Google it for a reason, right?
Google were the ones that popularized that search technology.
Their first kind of mission statement was do no harm, right? So it was a really nice idea, and I think they've done a lot of good, and they've evolved it. But it's kind of a couple of big dragons now controlling everything, right? Google is kind of basically how you get the information from the internet, and if Google is biased, which you can discuss, right, in terms of a search engine, and also how they actually monetize, can be discussed, good and bad. Everybody has to make money. I'm fine with that, right? But the point is, won't we end up in the same way? But I would say the potential of AI, as we have been discussing it, is even more pervasive, more revolutionary, more in every way of the we can think of, than the internet and then crawling and figuring out the results to find something. Which means that if you had a centralization already, you have a couple of companies who basically control most of it today.
Yes.
Won't it be even 10 times more of that centralization and not public, transparent with AI?
I think it will be more of the same, and whether it will be 10 times more or 100 times more, but yes, it will be more of the same, because and maybe some person's mind will be blown now, but I mean, if we look at the Google search engine, that is basically an AI system.
Yeah.
And it has been using what I at least would categorize as large language models since the advent.
Yeah.
Even if they are much larger now, the models for specific things. And it has been using kind of manually engineered ways to direct you to specific parts of the internet rather than others. It has forced you away from material.
And hidden material and exposed material.
Yes,
all
and
kinds
this
of
is
variants,
Bing, this is Google, so I'm not singling out anything. I'm saying that if you want a search engine that will allow you to browse basically all the possible documents online on the internet, and you want your queries responses returned in less than a second, because we are that way as humans. It's not possible for any kind of computer system to sift through all documents every time you write a query and to kind of match perfectly all the documents and send them back to you.
No.
Even if it was possible, you wouldn't be able to browse all of the hits, because you would get all existing hits to your query, and they would not be prioritized because there is no bias, right? We have not put in bias. So what I'm trying to say here, and I hope the message gets across, is in order to have a working search engine that is quick and that provides relevant responses to you, someone has to put in a lot of manual bias, and someone has to make connections by association. So the connections would be things like, oh, Tony is in Sweden.
Yep.
Maybe he's even in Karlskrona.
Yep.
He has previously searched about Hungary and about trips and so on. So when he searches for Budapest, he probably is,
going there as a
he's
tourist.
going there, he's interested in traveling information.
Yeah.
And so all of those biases and all of those kind of associations are used to swiftly hand you the response and to also give you a quite nice relevancy prioritization.
Yeah.
And if you try to browse with privacy on and not use any history before, and people can try this at home, search for something in Google in the regular way, and then you open a private tab that doesn't have any history about you, and you can even use a service that make your connection anonymized.
Yeah, VPN, for example.
VPN or any service that makes it impossible for Google or Bing to figure out where you are and or who you are.
Yeah.
And then you do the same search.
It's different.
You will get completely different responses.
So I think you always go out in a tangent. I hear what you're saying, and I think it's apt that you need an editor of some sort or a selector of some sort to get relevant information. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is when how that is done is not transparent. And I think that's what we mean by transparency and democratization to some extent is,
correct.
Well, one access, so people have access to the technology, right? And it's not like you'll always have better AIs than other AIs, and you pay for better AIs, and you have some public ones who are not that good, etc. That's just the nature of the beast, I guess. But I think transparency, and not only transparency, but also sensible transparency to the everyday person on how the AI reached. Think about schools. Your boy, right? He does a homework assignment, and he asks the future, I don't know, Zeus AI, it's a school AI developed by the government, right? But a company does it for them. And he asked, who was Gustav Vasa? For our international audience, was a king in Sweden, an important one. And he gets a really good answer. And he's learning, so he doesn't really know what the truth is.
Yes.
He needs to be able to figure out how to trust that, where it comes from, find the sources, be able to validate it, right? And not only another AI tells him if it's true or not, because that's AI of the AI of the AI, but actually he needs to not only train what he gains from using an AI to figure out who Gustav Vasa is. He actually has to have a different competence and put in time in a different thing. And that is the validation of the results coming from the AI.
Yes.
And I think ability to have that transparency is one thing. Training people to have that ability to figure out if it's good or bad. And at the same time, social pressure on companies not to be biased or be better at that transparency might be a really important part.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you said early in the podcast, some things can be regulated and should be. Mm-hmm. Some things are difficult to regulate, or at least they don't have the intended effect.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might need social pressure, or you need some kind of incentives. I mean, we can look at the environmental questions where some policies are very good because they make people behave better and more sensible. Yeah. Yeah. And other things are perhaps...
counterproductive.
Yeah. Right? So I think that we have covered a lot during this podcast, but we can at least reach the conclusion that there are a few clearly relevant strategies that should be taken by researchers, companies, society, lawmakers, and so on. It has to do with transparency, democratization. It has to do with traceability in order to understand why AI systems provide a certain answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also has to do with maintaining human abilities to both produce content and validate content while benefiting from the new technology. So those would be at least my own takeaways from what we have been discussing.
I think that's reasonable. And also, ending on a positive note, right?
Yes.
This is cool.
It is.
And for me, who haven't been in the weeds of AI like you have, I'm almost giddy. I see huge potential. But I think that the nature of the beast is that the plow was developed over 100, 200 or whatever years, right? Where the internet was developed over 30 years, right? And now AI is probably going to be 10 years, which means everything moves faster and faster, and it's kind of hard to keep up with all the things that are needed to make it as good as possible, or good in terms of it being good for humanity as a whole. Then you'll always have problems, and you always had extreme bad and extreme good, right? But as a whole. But if I ask you, as a concluding remark, and I'm going to ask you to predict something, and of course we're going to save this, and then in 10 years when it comes to a result, we're going to say you were wrong or you were right.
I have no problem with that.
Are you brave enough?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So give me, what's the worst thing that can happen, but end with what the best thing that could happen given AI as a technology as we see it today.
Yes, I mean that is both a kind of a prediction, but it is also, I guess, just conclusions I can make today based on what I already see.
Yeah.
So I can basically see that some good and bad things have already happened,
yeah.
and we can try to make the best out of the good things. If I look at what is the worst that can happen, I think it is to leave this technology in the hands of very few, very powerful organizations and not regulating them, and kind of losing the ability to even function without these systems. All of these are, and mark my words, man-made or human issues. So I'm not afraid of the technology.
No.
I'm afraid about the people behind the technology. And that is
the people using the technology.
And the people using the technology.
Yeah.
So that would be the bad scenario. The good scenario, I would have to give a very brief metaphor or metaphoric story. When I am out in schools and talk about AI, I try to be quite critical and explain to them good things but also bad things, and try to have a balanced view. And I tell them that one of the problems I have with the way we use the internet is that I used to go to the library to get information about certain things.
Yep.
And there used to be a very usually trained librarian there that would guide me. I would say that what I was interested in, and he or she would take me to some section of the library and explain maybe that this is a little bit for older boys and this is for younger boys, and this one is more factual and this is fiction here, and so on. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't require all competence myself to find the information. I would have a quite nice moderator of information or mediator of information. Now, the way young people, and I really mean that, I sound even older now, are using internet for information gathering, it's as if they were at a huge library, I mean unlimited sized library.
Yep.
The problem is there is no librarian there.
No.
So
You could say Google is a librarian.
yeah, well, no, I wouldn't go so
Okay.
far, but I would say like this: there is no librarian there. You're on your own, right? And certain very relevant information has been placed down in the basement with a sign that says, beware of the tiger.
Yeah.
And everything is in disarray. So you cannot really go from point A to B to C and predict what will be point D in this library. So you're wandering around aimlessly almost. And if you're lucky, you find the right book.
Yep.
And so I think what you have to do in that situation, now I come to what I think would be a good scenario, is that you have to develop the competency to be your own librarian.
Can't we have librarians?
Yes, I think we can have, in this situation with internet now, if I'm pulling this and AI, if I'm really going in that direction, I think that we could have librarians, some kind of competent people that can help people how to search and validate information. Yes, but at the end of the day, I think everyone needs to teach themselves through school and through their own competencies to become their own librarian and procurer of information. And so that mindset can be taught in schools and in societies, that we are now kind of responsible for our own library. Everyone has the same library, the internet, of course.
Yeah.
And AI is governing how, when we search using the search engines, we use ChatGPT that also gathers information from the internet and produces things for us. But we have to become competent in using these tools in the right way and navigating with these tools without losing our old abilities. Much like actually, if we return to, what did you say? 100 years ago, people could make fire and we said they can navigate. Now today, people use their phone to navigate, right?
Yes.
But what happens if the phone dies in the forest? You die in the forest because you cannot navigate, right?
Yes.
So all I'm saying is maintain your manual navigation abilities, yes, while of course using Google Maps to speed things up when you can.
Yeah.
So that's where I would end. That's develop competences to use these tools.
But I like the analogy of being your own librarian. I think that's a nice way of looking at it. But it also changes completely what we teach kids.
Yes.
And engineers and everybody else, right? But I mean,
you're inviting me now to another podcast, I think.
Yes, I am. Well, I know it's been a while, but let's do this again.
Absolutely.
And maybe look at what people want to hear and discuss that in more detail. I'd like to thank you a lot.
Thank you for the discussion.
And let's see what happens in 10 years.
Absolutely. I can't wait.